So, Kuki Shinobu is almost guaranteed to be terrible for a number of reasons. She's Electro, possibly the worst element in the game. She's a 4-star, so she will be weaker than most of the cast in general. She's a healer, which is the worst class of characters in the game, other than infusion characters. She has elemental mastery scaling on an Electro character when Electro has terrible reactions other than Taser, and she is Inazuman, which miHoYo has a habit of making the newer characters worse than older characters for no reason in particular. Her only saving grace is her Electro application and her damage or healing numbers, so let's look at her kit and see if she has any of those to help compensate for everything else. But before that, hello, Aaron here. How y'all doing today? Happy? Sad? Crunk? That's good, that's good. I just wanted to interrupt the flow of this video to say that this is not a personal attack on those who do like this character. This video is specifically to talk about Kuki Shinobu and her future viability as a character. I will be doing the same thing for Yolan, that should come out either tomorrow or the day after or something like that. So if you would like to see that, and spoilers, see why she's basically guaranteed to be overpowered, then please do subscribe to my channel and hit that bell so you're notified when it comes out. But now let's get back into the video. So like I stated before, Kuki has many issues with her already at face value, but what can she do and how effectively can she do these things? Well, let's start with her kit. First off, her base attack is really low at 212, making it the 8th lowest attack in the game and tied with Ningguang, Diona, and the Traveler. That's fine, however, since the damage of her skill and her normals scale with attack while everything else scales with HP. She has the 16th highest HP pool in the game, tied with Rosaria, so she's about middle of the pack. However, she does ascend with HP percent, making this easier on her. Her normals have her slash her blade and throw kunai out in front of her, dealing damage, but since her attack is low and since the scaling of these are not great, this is not where her focal point lies. Instead, it is with her skill and burst, which also have pitiful scaling. Her skill has her stab herself, reducing her HP by 30% and summoning a ring around the active character. The initial cast deals damage based on her attack while also dealing damage to enemies and healing the current character once every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds for a max of 8 times. The damage scales off of her attack while the healing scales off of her own HP. The health consumption of this skill can take her no lower than 20% of her max health and will still cast the skill. Her burst is an Electro Amber elemental burst that deals damage over 2 seconds. However, the duration can be increased to 3.5 seconds if she casts her burst while below or equal to 50% of her max HP. This ability seems to strike 4 times every second, so it can strike either 8 or 14 times, and it deals damage based on her max HP. It also has a 15-second cooldown, but only a 60 energy cost, thank God. Now you may be thinking, an Electro Amber elemental burst, a 15-second cooldown, barely an AoE? This looks awful. To which I have to say, you're right, it sucks. It just sucks. That's it. Her Ascension talents are pretty meh too. Her Ascension 1 grants her a 15% healing bonus when equal to or below 50% of her max health, keeping with the theming of the rest of her kit, which I like. Her Ascension 4 passive amplifies the damage and healing of her elemental skill based on her current elemental mastery, 75% for the heal and 25% for the damage. This number is also just a flat amount. This is what makes her a bit weird and confusing to build, because now the question is whether this EM is now worth it on this character, and in short, it really is. Well, maybe. I have done a few itty bitty maths, comparing a support build and a DPS build for her while also comparing them to other characters. The support build consists of a 4-piece tenacity since she benefits from almost every part of it with a freedom sworn, and the DPS build consists of a 2-piece thundering fury and a 2-piece tenacity with the jade cutter. The builds also had really high investments and are basically impossible to get, so these numbers are basically at max potential. For her support build, I focused on HP, ER, and EM with a 50% and 100% crit ratio, whereas for her DPS build, I focused on about a 95% and 220% crit ratio with HP and EM wherever I could fit it. At first glance, the numbers are absurdly low, even her healing, which can't even cap out a clam set over the course of its entire duration. By comparison, the support build heals 140% of what the damage build heals. It deals 36% of the damage with the skill, the burst deals 27% of the damage, and the electrocharge damage deals 283% of the damage that the full damage build does. Her heal is least impacted by the stats of these two builds, which makes a lot of sense due to heavy investment in both HP and EM. Her main difference is in the DPS of her entire kit. For an entire 15-second rotation for her DPS with a DPS build would be 9,045 damage per second, whereas for her support build, it would be 6,567 damage per second. About 73% of what her her damage build would deal. However, this does not take into account the total difference that Tenacity would have on the rest of the team, so the potential could be higher. I also tested her damage for an entire EM build, like balls to the walls EM, highest you can get on her, using a 4-piece Thundering Fury, and the total damage per second turned out to be about 7,484, or 83% of the damage she would deal with a full DPS build. The support and EM builds would also deal more damage to mobs too, due to the bouncing of Electrocharged, meaning they could have dealt more damage. At least that's how it should have worked, because apparently Kuki's skill and burst follow normal ICD rules. So, you know, the only good thing about Kuki was ripped away from her. Love ya whole universe, you're the best. The numbers are actually 8,264 for the damage build, 4,354 DPS or 53% of damage for the support build, and 4,683 or 57% of the damage for the full EM build. These percentages change with her C2, which I guess means it's a good time to talk about her constellations. Her C1 increases the AoE of her burst by 50%, which helps confirm her damage on harder to hit enemies. Her C2 is pretty good, as it grants her elemental skill permanent uptime. It also means that the damage of her skill goes on for longer, as does her Electro application. The DPS for her becomes 8,459 for a damage build, 4,907 or 58% of the damage for a supportive build, and 5,383 or 64% of damage for an EM build. If she did not follow normal ICD rules, her other builds would have been better, as her support build would be at a bit more than 80% of the damage that the damage build would deal, and the EM build would be at about a bit more than 90% of the damage, making it her best option at C2. But sadly, that's not the case. C3 increases the level of her skill, and C5 increases the level of her burst. C4 makes it so that when the character affected by her skill, normal, charged, or plunging attacks an enemy, an electro explosion is dealt where the enemy is struck. The damage dealt is based on her max HP. This constellation has a 5-second cooldown and is only going to be about 9.5k damage at most. This constellation is terrible due to its low damage and unreasonably long cooldown. Her C6 is also really idiotic. When Kuki is below 25% health, or when she takes lethal damage, she will not die, and will gain a 150 elemental mastery buff for 15 seconds. The effect will activate automatically when she reaches 1 HP, and it has a 60-second cooldown. While it does make sense that she can proc this with some ease due to her HP loss mechanic, it still is not enough to get her to this point very easily. This is because she is a tank, so she will be taking less damage. She's also a healer, so she's mitigating a lot of damage she would take, and she is off-field almost all of the time, so she will almost never be taking damage. This will activate on the second rotation of abilities, but it only grants her 150 EM, which is practically nothing. She can't utilize it well because her skill has normal ICD, and the healing and damage it grants is pitiful. It grants 112.5 extra healing per tick, and 37.5 extra damage per tick of her skill. Over the course of her skill's entire duration on a single target, this is an extra 375 damage and 1,125 healing on an ally. This character's C6 grants her not even 400 extra damage, and only slightly more than 1k healing. This is the worst constellation in the game, hands down. It does nothing and requires you to almost die. The freaking cooldown is atrocious too. They gave this character garbage scaling, terrible stats, the worst element in the game, self-damage. They make her the worst class in the game as a healer. They give her elemental mastery scaling. She has limited elemental reaction procs. She has small AoEs, useless constellations. She offers nothing other than self-damage. Am I missing something? I hope I'm missing something, because this character just seems absolutely terrible. Even Amber is better than this. There might be some error on my side, which I hope is the case. Like, for instance, my math is a little lower toward the elemental reaction side, since I am only considering that Electrocharged is procced one singular time every 2 ticks of her skill. If we do take into account that her Electrocharge will bounce between multiple enemies, then a full EM build with some HP would just be better, especially with her C2. Since she can only proc the reaction once every 2 ticks of her skill, you would have more control over when she would proc the reaction rather than it being unreliable. It's still pretty unreliable though, unless you run her as the only Electro character on your team. So I don't even think that this is a great example. I also compared an entire elemental skill damage build of hers with Xinyan, and the numbers are sadly really close. Focusing on an elemental skill build for Xinyan will have her deal about 26,000 damage for the 12-second duration of her shield, whereas with Kuki, within 12 seconds of her skill, she will deal 24,000 damage, about 2k less, or 92% of what Xinyan's does. I can also compare this to a full HP Kokomi, whose skill will deal about 20k or 82% of C0 Kuki's damage over its 12-second duration, while also healing for about 53k or 178% of what Kuki's most healing over its duration would heal. That's not even counting when Kokomi is in her burst, where her skill will be dealing about 64k or 262% of the damage that Kuki's skill deals at C0 and 209% at C2. Lastly, I'm just going to compare her to Amber real quick. With a full burst damage build for Kuki, she deals 51,368 damage within the 2 seconds, and within the 3 seconds she deals about 90k damage. However, if we give Amber a support build, keep in mind, she will deal more damage in those 2 seconds than Kuki will. And with a full DPS build, she will almost double it. It will be about the same amount that Kuki will deal in 3.5 seconds. It's really absurd. Amber is a better Kuki. What? I'm mainly comparing her to these characters because they are considered for the most part to be not good, and some of the worst in the game by a majority of the community. I wanted to show the horrible state she is in because I think it is incredible how terrible she will be if she is launched in this state, which on God I hope they don't do. The only 2 things she has going for her are her elemental reaction proccing, I guess, and her elemental burst damage when below half health. This character is in an absolutely horrendous state at the moment, and I am completely bewildered on how anyone on their dev team thought that this was a good idea. I would like to leave this video off on a good note, but I really don't know how. This character just seems completely unusable, and it's just sad. To any of you math nerds out there, I want to hear specifically from you. Please prove me wrong, because nothing about this seems right. But I have tested many other characters, and they all seem accurate to in-game, so I don't believe my numbers are too far off. I've also quintuple checked the numbers I have gotten on Kuki, but this woman really making me doubt myself. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy. I hope people type in the comments useful information, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But that's all I have, so I shall wish you adieu. Bye bye.